Hi everyone and welcome to MZ webinars. Today we're starting our first series of webinars on and around economic development, and we'll be discussing our local sector StrengthFinder initiative, and we'll be addressing and talking about issues related to economic growth at a local level. What I would say is please feel free to add any questions in the box of your control panel at any time, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the presentation. I'd like to obviously introduce myself. My name is Will Cookson. I'm Business Development Manager that focuses on economic development at MZ. And I'd also like to offer the opportunity for my colleague to also introduce himself.
Yep, I'm Duncan Brown. I'm a senior UK economist at MZ, and so I'll be covering a bit more of the detail of the cluster classification itself.
So I'll just go through the agenda briefly, and then I will hand over to Duncan, who will take us through the presentation, and then I'll come back at the end just to talk about next steps and to also just mention what, well, to pick up any questions that may have been raised during the webinar. Are we able to move the presentation forward? Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Sorry about that.
Okay. So I just wanted to briefly set out the agenda. We will obviously introduce MZ and give you a little bit of background on our organisation. In essence, so it's probably worth mentioning here and now that MZ's mission is to use labour market data to inform and connect people, education and employers. We'll also run through what we deem to be the challenge at present faced by people such as yourselves, how we can help. We'll run through the cluster classification, and we will look at how we're able to identify local strengths within your economy. We'll investigate a strength cluster, so really drill down to another level of detail, identify how this impacts on workforce and skills, how we can bring insight to strategy, and then after all of that, I'll return and go through next steps, and we'll pick up your questions under discussion. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to Duncan Brown, our senior consultant.
Yeah, okay, so thanks for that, Will. The focus of this webinar is really about how you can better use industry data to really understand your local economy, understand its strengths, and also where to take it, really. And so part of that, is really wrapped up with what MZ does as an organisation. So a little bit of a background on us for those of you that don't know. Our business is local labour market intelligence that really just helps you to make better decisions about your local economy. We work across education, employment, as well as economic development, and we bring insights in lots of different forms. I think where we started off on this particular track in terms of the sector StrengthFinder discussion is that in talking to people working in local government and in LEPs and in other agencies as well, we had this discussion about how do we retain, grow and attract businesses to our area, and there's a lot that gets sort of packed in with that. Which kinds of businesses, which kinds of businesses should we sort of be hoping to retain, which ones should we be hoping to attract, and the sort of the different industries, the different sizes, the different stages of the life cycle all kick into it as well, and then all of these are the sort of the ongoing sort of challenges faced by local economic developers. But at the moment, there are obviously these particular extra features facing economic development in a local area at the moment. One is the end of the central government grant from the universal business rate, which is going to lead to quite a big change in the sort of the relationship of the local economy to the health of local government finance, and gives every local authority a much more direct and raw connection to the health of its local business sector. The next one is devolution, which is obviously affecting quite a large part of the country, with sort of the growth deals that have emerged, and the sort of the devolution to combined authorities, and all of the other initiatives that go around that. And then Brexit, which is rarely off of the headlines for all manner of different reasons. And of course, the big thing with Brexit is the uncertainty that it gives us as to where our areas are going to go, in terms of what industries are going to suffer as a result of Brexit, which ones are going to face new opportunities as a result of Brexit, which ones are going to face challenges because they've relied on the European Union as a route to recruitment, where it might not be available in the future. And then finally, one that wraps up a lot of these is competition between regions. That in that setting, with devolution, with Brexit, with the sort of the shift to localized business rate finance, there's going to be increasing competition between regions. And so actually, what economic development does becomes absolutely critical to the future health of a local area in a way that it goes beyond what it has before, really. So what does that mean for economic developers? Well, to succeed, there's a few things that need to happen. And of course, all of this is the standard theory of what economic developers do. And most of this presentation is really about understanding how to put it into practice in a particular way. But to succeed, that means aligning interventions with economic strategy. And to do that, we have to gain understanding of what the local industries are, and what their specific needs are that we want to tackle. And I think this is where, as MZ, we really started this conversation with a few local authorities, that because of the difficulty in getting data that's meaningful and usable for a local area, oftentimes we find economic development is often made on the basis of what we think are the local strengths at a very broad level, but actually translating that into a very specific industries that we want to help and working out how best that we can help them is actually quite difficult to do, in finding the facts to really make targeted decisions. And I think that's where we wanted to make some progress. And it's that last bullet point there about turning it into actionable intelligence. It has really been our sort of motivation in this discussion, really. That what we wanted to do was find a way of getting data on the local industry structure, working out what the strengths and opportunity areas were, what the risk areas are as well, and also working out what some of the underlying causes are, to give local economic developers, but also all their stakeholders, be they in education, be they in local recruitment, be they in inward investment, could all work together to actually think about how they could really change the sort of the environment in the local area to really tackle those needs and take advantage of growth opportunities, or also to try and diminish risk to the local economic area as well. So in terms of how can we help, so I think what we want to talk to local authorities about is, and other local economic agents as well, is really to help you understand what is driving your local economy, and we'll show you some of the tools that we're developing to do that. Provide some insights to enable you to identify which are those sectors which can be seen as potential strengths, opportunities and threats. And therefore, as a result of that, ensure you're best placed to build a strategy that can retain, grow and attract businesses to your region. And I think it's that last bit that really is important, that, you know, to some extent, there are tools out there which can help you to identify the strengths, opportunities and threats. We think we've got some that make it easier and more compelling, but we think we've also got some tools that can help you to understand what those needs are, that can actually do something about it as well. So in terms of the principles behind what we've done, I'll just set them out at this high level before delving into the detail of them. So first of all, we've got a new cluster classification that regroups industries, detailed industries, from the ONS's standard industrial classification at the 4-digit level, and we've regrouped them into meaningful economic clusters. So there's a broader set of them. So we're not talking about detailed industries that can sometimes be a bit too niche to matter. but also they're not reliant on the high level of the SIT classification that can often be too functional and not really reflect the linkages. So, yeah, all manufacturing is lumped into one, all support services is lumped into one. Actually, we know that industries across manufacturing and services can interrelate, and it's that kind of linkage that we've tried to really capture with our cluster classification. Next, we've tried to take care of the context. So we want to understand if you've got a strength in a particular cluster, where are the comparison areas that you need to be aware of, whether they're just down the road and therefore you can try and link in with them, or whether they're further away and you can learn from them. But then equally within the local area, using our data on supply chain relationships to understand how different industries relate together, and how you might be able to use that to your advantage to develop a cluster that you think has got a growth potential for your area. So the next point is to home in on key occupations. So one of the real assets that we have within MC is a detailed staffing pattern that allows us to translate industry data into occupational data. So we can actually look at what the skills needs are that will drive that industry, and so we can use that to create the sort of the capacity within the area to build the workforce that attracts more employers to grow and expand in your area, and then more detailed intelligence to target the intervention to very specific occupations and very specific skill sets, so that you can then inform, say, your local college as to what it is that you need to really help unlock this growth opportunity. And then, the sort of the real implication of all this is that if we can then bring that data to your workflow as a local economic developer and think about it in terms of exploring, prioritizing, investigating, and acting, then we can begin to really unlock the potential of your local area using data to really target scarce resources to get the most the largest possible return. So I'll just start off with a bit of the science, as it were, about the new cluster classification. So what we do is, and this is adapting methodology that was used in a large project run by some academics out of Harvard University. One of them was Michael Porter, who the really Anunnaki amongst you like me will remember was one of the creators of the cluster concept. The US government a few years ago paid him and some other academics to develop some benchmark clusters, and they published all their method papers, and so we've been able to replicate the process in the UK. And so what we do is we start with the 560 odd industries at the 4-digit SIG level. So that gives us very detailed, granular industries, right down to sort of making rubber products and things like that. And we've got localized employment data for each one of these, and we've got supply chain data. So it allows us to do quite a lot with it. And so what we did was we sort of developed 4 measures for each of those industries, and also for their links to each other as well. So the first one was, for each industry on its own, was it local or tradable? Now, this is a question of, there are some industries, healthcare is one of them, where most production is where people actually live. Most of us won't travel across the country for a medical intervention unless it's very niche. And so most health services are actually localized. Whereas if you think about, say, the manufacturing of submarines, well, there's one place in the country that does it, and so it's a tradable good that you're talking about there. That area makes a surplus by being able to sell those to the rest of the country in this case. So that's the first question that we looked at. The second one is which industries are co-located. So comparing each one of those 560 industries with every single other one, which ones have employment in the same sorts of places. And then also, are they using the same workforce? Do they rely on the same sorts of occupations? So there are some jobs that are very industry specific. So if we think about electrical engineers, say, if you work in, healthcare, there's only so many electrical engineers in that, whereas in certain kinds of manufacturing, there's a lot of them. So what we want to do is find the industries that connect by using the same kind of skills there. And then finally, are they buying and selling from one another? do industries have a key role in the same supply chain? And that really does emphasize the sort of the strong economic linkages there. And so we use those measures together and created a clustering algorithm, and we worked from there to build it into 49 clusters. Now, I'm going to flash them up here. It's a very long list because there are 49 of them. And so I'm not expecting you to remember all of these after that. I'm sure we'll be able to share the list with you all afterwards. These green ones in the bottom right-hand corner are the local clusters. They're the ones that pretty much take place everywhere. They reflect where people live. So things like, say, education and childcare. Yeah, every area where people live has schools and nurseries. Local transport, everywhere's got bus services and things like that. Retail, because everywhere's got shops. It's these ones in black that are the tradable clusters. These are the ones that really drive economic value in an area. They're the ones where you get your unique proposition as an area. So if you've got a manufacturing cluster that's making goods that other places don't tend to make, they'll appear here. So you get things like your manufacturing ones. So you'll see things like production technology and vehicle and defense technology. Then you'll get the sort of the high-end service industries, be it professional services or digital or financial and legal. And then you get the agricultural ones as well, and fisheries and things like that. So these are the industries that really sort of characterize a local area. So, so in terms of using these clusters to find your local strengths, what we do is we start with an analysis that plots each of those clusters in terms of two measures. And what we're going to do here is use Basingstoke as our example area, and that's for no other reason than we're based in Basingstoke as an organisation. And so we're going to plot each of these clusters in terms of two measures. The first one is the location quotient. Now, what that does is it measures employment locally as a share of the total employment, and it divides that by the national equivalent measure. And so therefore, if you've got a location quotient of 1, then you are at the national level for that industry. You're not particularly specialised. Once you get above 1.2, which is where this vertical black line comes in, then we say that you've got a significant specialisation in that area. That industry is important in the local economy. Then on the y-axis, we've got national growth. So what we've done for each of these clusters is taken it nationally and looked at the projected growth from 2016 to 2021. And so what that allows us to do, and the black horizontal line is the average growth rate across all employment, is basically to say, well, which are the areas that are strengths, opportunities, and threats? So strengths are those areas where you've got a specialism and it's going to grow strongly in the next 5 years. Opportunities are those areas where you've not got a specialism, but it is growing. So if you can find a way to latch onto that growth, then you're going to go gain some advantage from that. And then threats are those areas where you've got a specialism, but the industry is declining relatively, nationally speaking, and so it's actually going to be quite difficult for you to sort of capitalize on that. Now, that doesn't mean that it's impossible. It means that you need to make sure that if the industry is going to consolidate, it favors your area, but it does mean that your approach might be somewhat different to how it will be for a strength or an opportunity. We don't bother with this bottom left quadrant because these are industries where you are not specialised in it at the moment, and it's not growing nationally. It's in decline nationally, and so therefore there's not a lot to be gained by trying to get into something that you're not already into. So using Basingstoke data, we start off by plotting each of those clusters on those two measures. The green areas, the green bubbles there, are the local industries, so things like retail and education, childcare and health and care. And because they tend to be everywhere, very few areas tend to have a specialism in them. You'll notice that there are a couple that just stray into the specialism territory, but only just. So it's the purple bubbles that we're really interested in. And I'm just going to pick out a few of them here. So you can see professional services is right on the borderline between a strength and opportunity. Creative is an opportunity area because it's growing nationally, but isn't a particular specialism in Basingstoke. Digital, which is going to be a focus for the rest of this presentation, is probably the most prominent strength for Basingstoke. it's got a high location quotient, and it's also got a high growth rate. So that means that it's actually something that Basingstoke indeed has already got a strong specialism in, and it's got some growth potential nationally. So it's something that can be capitalised on. So what we can do is run the same chart for the digital cluster to look at the 4-digit industries that sit within it. And so we're using the same 2 measures, location quotient and the national growth rate. And so what we can see here is that, when we talk about the digital cluster, then it's actually got a set of industries within it. So things like computer consultancy, but also telecoms, computer programming, software publishing. And what you can see there is that actually Basingstoke's sort of strengths in the digital cluster are really dominated by computing and telecom, and in terms of computer consultancy and telecom, but really not things like computer programming, and certainly not things like satellite telecoms or computer facilities. And so we can use that to start to drill down a bit further and sort of see, well, if we want to focus on a particular subset of that industry, say we wanted to focus on software publishing, we can say, well, which are the peer areas for it? And so what we do here is we plot for the whole cluster. We say what are the top 10 cluster areas for that cluster in the country, and what we find is that Basingstoke, although it is a strong cluster in Basingstoke, it's some way behind the leaders there. So the leaders are Wokingham, Bracknell Forest, West Berkshire, and they've all got location quotients around 4 or 5 or more, which means that actually the sort of the strength of those clusters as a specialism within the local economy is often double what it is in the Basingstoke area. So that's bad news and good news all at the same time. It means that although it's a strength for Basingstoke, it's not as much of a strength as it is for those areas. The good news is it shows that it can become more of a strength because other areas have done it. And there's another lesson that you can take from this analysis as well, that if you were to plot these on a map, you'd find that they're all not too far away from Basingstoke either. They're all in the Thames Valley area. And so actually it suggests that Basingstoke's in a good location in terms of the digital cluster, and that it's probably benefiting from that. And so that again suggests it's got another point of strength to build on. And so what we can do then is start to look at opportunities within the supply chain. So this is where we're looking within Basingstoke, and we're going to see what are the kind of industries that digital is buying, and in particular software publishing from other parts of England and the UK and beyond, and which parts it's doing itself. And so EMSI's got quite detailed supply chain data through our input-output modelling process. And so what we do is through our input-output model, we have a detailed estimate of every 4-digit industry and how it buys and sells from every other 4-digit industry. And as I said, we use that in the construction of the clusters. But then we use that here to say, well, for this industry, how it's buying different industries, which are the ones that it's importing more than its peer areas, those other districts in the southeast with a high concentration of digital. And we see that computer programming there really comes up highly there. So it's kind of, this isn't a strength area for Basingstoke. Other peer areas aren't importing that much of this service, but Basingstoke is. And so that suggests that if we wanted to really build on it, then we'd actually pick on computer programming to really push further with that. And so what we can then do is say, well, within the computer programming industry, what are the occupations that really kind of dominate that industry? And so we use our staffing pattern data to pick out the top 10 industries by top 10 occupations by importance within that industry. So you'll see there, unsurprisingly, it's programmers at the top, and then it's other IT professionals, and then it's project and program managers. And we see, not surprisingly, that it's the other areas that have a real advantage in most of those jobs. So again, we've used a location quotient measure, and we see that Basingstoke has got a strength in most of the top jobs there. Web design and development professionals is one where it's got slightly below strength. That possibly reflects its weaker showing in creative cluster. But if you compare it to those top 10 leading areas, then actually they all tend to have a much stronger specialization there. And so for Basingstoke and Dean, if they really want to develop computer programming as a specialism, they probably need to think about how they can either attract workers in those kind of jobs to the area, or else to train up new ones and get them to stay in the area. And so what we can also do is look at measuring occupational labour demand. And so what we do here is we use MZ's job postings data, which is a real-time source. Every month we track something like 800,000 job postings across the UK, unique job postings. And that allows us to compare that to the number of job openings we expect. And so we see that actually there's a pretty high level of job demand for some of these jobs compared to the actual number of jobs locally that you get. So if you look at programmers and software development professionals, here we've got something like 2.5 times the number of job openings we expect covered by job postings within the area. So it's quite a significant number. And so actually it suggests that there is that sort of wishful, this kind of work already there. So if you can attract or grow workers into these occupations, then there is the demand there, and you'd be pushing at an open door. So just get back to that window there. And so finally, what we can then do is just drill down onto the programmers and software developers occupation group and use that same job postings data to look at which are the skills that are most sought after. It's particularly powerful with tech jobs because job postings often do mention particular languages. And so we see there that if you can get a programmer that's got skills with C# or JavaScript or SQL, then actually there's a lot of those job postings are going to be relevant to those. And there's a lot more of this kind of skills data that's available to really unpick that kind of question. And so at that point, I think I'm handing back over to you, Will.
Yes, thank you, Duncan. Really, really interesting to hear the methodology that sits behind it, but also how it can be used in practice. In terms of what I want to talk about, I'm aware of time, so I'll go reasonably quickly. Essentially, we see it as being critical that strategy is informed by hard data. And in using that hard data, in this instance, you'd be able to target sectors that you want to grow, but also monitor where targeted interventions can make the biggest difference. So make some strategic decisions in regards to where you are going to make interventions and where you are going to apply your resource. We are firm believers that data should come to strategy, not the other way around. It's no use if data is an afterthought. It should be informing and helping you at each stage of the process. The other thing at MZ that we're very passionate about is the strength of local data and bringing the data that you have down to a district level, which obviously you've seen through what Duncan's been taking you through. We believe that the final, the best thing to do, if you've not seen it already, is to go onto our website. You'll see the link. We'll share it after the. I think it would have been on the email that invited you to join the webinar, but we'll circulate it afterwards as well. Download a free report for your area. Have a look at the insight it provides. Compare that against your local understanding. And then what we would really like you to do is to discuss any specific challenges for us to explore potential solutions. And the best way to do that is to make contact with myself. My contact details will be available on emails that you've received from MZ. But essentially, give me an email or by all means, give me a call and we'll arrange a time for a conversation. All that it leaves me to say is to thank you for attending the webinar today. Our next webinar in this series is going to be digging into a SWOT analysis using the MZ cluster methodology. I hope you can join us for that. We'll be going a step more into further detail. I would also like to say that everyone that's attended will get a full recording. So for colleagues that weren't able to attend, by all means do share this. Thank you. And thank you, Duncan.
That's right. And if there are any questions, feel free to ask them now.
There are yes, someone has just pointed out that it is the 25th of February is a Sunday. I don't know why we have got it on a 25th as a Sunday. It's not a deliberate mistake. I believe that we were trying to schedule it for, it was the last Thursday. So it would have been the 22nd, I believe, the 22nd. I'm not sure why that's coming up as the 25th. I'll make sure that's confirmed in any communications that are shared as a follow-up. Thank you, Lisa Clark, for spotting that. I haven't got any further questions at this point. All I'd like to say is if people do have questions.
Mistake, just to make sure people were watching.
Exactly, an undeliberate mistake. What I would like to say is for any questions that might occur after, feel free to make contact either through email or phone with myself. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Oh, yes, just a comment to say great webinar, thanks. So there you go, Duncan. What a nice note to leave it on. Thank you. And yes, do join us for the next webinar. And like I said, make contact.